is Neil O'Brien Tozer, and I am here at the Atlanta History Center on July the 23rd, 2003, excuse me, to interview. Would you please tell me who you are, sir?
Thomas C. Moore, M-O-O-R-E.
And Mr. Moore, where were you born?
I was born on January the 5th, 1914, in a small country town, White Plains, Georgia.
Yes, sir.
Not Plains, but White Plains, Georgia, which is about in Greene County, about halfway to Augusta, from Atlanta to Augusta.
And how did you get to Atlanta?
Well, I had a somewhat uneventful childhood. I went to school at White Plains, finished the 10th grade there, and then had to go away to Greensboro, Georgia, 12 miles away, to finish the 11th grade, which was all that was required in those days. 11th grade was enough to get you into college. And then I applied for and got accepted at Georgia Tech in Atlanta as a co-op student, which means you have to work 6 months and go to school 6 months, and it takes 5 years to get through that way.
Yes, sir.
From that, from my ROTC work, when I graduated, I was looking for a job. I had an offer with the Tennessee Valley Authority. I had an electrical engineering degree. I had an offer with the Tennessee Valley Authority for a job which paid $110 a month. But I also, because through my ROTC, Reserve Officers Training course at Georgia Tech, I was offered a commission in the Marine Corps, which paid $120 a month plus some allowances, and I didn't know anything about the Marine Corps, but I took the highest paying job, and entered the Marine Corps in July of 1936 when I graduated, and stayed in for 28 years.
Where was the first place you were sent?
Well, I first was sent to the Marine Corps Officers Basic School, which was located in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Navy Yard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and went through 9 months training there to learn how to become a Marine, although I already had my Army training that I had gotten at Georgia Tech.
And
from there, shall I go on?
Please.
Yes, I went to, I had sea duty on an old battleship. I was a junior Marine officer on a battleship for a year and a half, and we made midshipmen.
when was this? When you graduated in 36?
Yes, and this was
Graduated from Tech in 36?
and 37.
And this was 1937?
I went 9 months to Marine Corps Basic School, and then my first duty after learning how to become a Marine at basic school was sea duty for a year and a half aboard a battleship. We made cruises up and down the East Coast, taking reserve naval units, giving them some training. We went to Europe twice with a midshipman, loaded midshipman aboard, went to Europe twice.
And this was in what,
37,
38?
that's right, 37, 38.
We were not in the war.
No, we were not. And then as war clouds were beginning to form in the Pacific, the Marine Corps developed what they called a defense battalion, which was equipped to go out and defend small islands in the Pacific. And I went to school at Quantico, Virginia for 9 months, learning about how to use these anti-aircraft and seacoast artillery weapons. And then I was sent out to, and then I got married. And came back to Atlanta, got married, and went to...
When was that?
That was I was married in October the 15th.
No, I was.
You were born then, November the 3rd, I'm sorry. I'll be in the doghouse for that, but...
No, you won't, that's fine.
All right.
What year?
Of 1939.
And please tell us your wife's name.
My wife is named Bryant, B-R-Y-A-N-T, Bryant Holsenbeck, Holsenbeck, which was her maiden name. And at that time, I was assigned to Parris Island, South Carolina, where we, in the battalion that I was being trained in, we were needed to train the men in firing and using the weapons that we were going to set up in the Pacific. And we were at Hilton Head Island. Hilton Head had no causeway to it at that time. You had to go by boat. There was nothing there but a small oyster growing factory and oyster beds, and where a few people were harvesting the oysters. There was we were assigned to Parris Island. We went over by boat, and we had a tent camp on Hilton Head. There was also the owner of Hilton Head was some rich man from New York who had a hunting lodge there, and that's the only thing that was at Hilton Head at that time. We went over. I went over once a week and stayed during the whole week, and then would come back to Parris Island. And I had brought my wife with me then to an adjacent town, Beaufort, South Carolina, where I would get to see her for a little over 24 hours a week for several months while we trained at Hilton Head.
And this was 39?
This was, yes, 1939, right, late 39 and early 40. And then when our unit was ready, we all, guns, men, officers, cats, dogs, and family, loaded aboard a ship, went down, stopped at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and went through the Panama Canal, back on up to San Diego, picked up some more troops, and then we went on out to Hawaii, landed at Pearl Harbor, in the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard.
And what was the date of that?
That was in late 40.
I believe it was May is when we arrived at that.
May of 40?
I think that's,
Yeah.
I think that's,
Yeah.
I think I still remember the
Well,
picture.
the summer of 1940 anyway. And we stayed there in barracks at the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard, getting some more equipment, getting trained a little bit more. And then my unit was assigned to go to Midway Island, which is about 1,000 miles west of Hawaii. And we went out there to set up gun installations. I left in January of 1941 to go there, leaving a pregnant wife in a rental home and on the
was it Pearl Harbor?
on the edge of Pearl Harbor at Pearl City. Yes, and so I went out and a month or so later, on March the 1st, found out that we had produced a little girl. And
Congratulations.
after a week or so, they let me come back for a few days to see my child, and then to see my wife, and then I had to go back to Midway. And stayed out there until about September of 1941, September, October. At that time, we had been living on this remote island with nothing on it much but goonie birds. And
What were they?
they were the type of albatross, which are very funny birds that did a funny mating dance and would land and topple over when they landed. And so anyway, we were sent back to Pearl Harbor to another unit had come out and relieved us and taken over the installations, the guns that we had installed around Midway, on Midway. And then we were back to be re-equipped and retrained and get a few replacements and to be prepared to go out to another Pacific island. And so there we were in the barracks at Pearl Harbor. The unit was there.
How many are in a unit, Mr.
We were about 1,200 in this battalion that I was assigned to. By that time, I was a captain in the Marine Corps. And so those are the officers and those who had families were allowed to go home to their families on weekends or at night when they were not needed, when they were not on duty. And so I had gone home that weekend on the night of December the 6th, and so I was at home on the edge of the harbor with my wife and baby daughter on the morning of December the 7th.
When the Japanese struck.
When the Japanese struck. And may I read just a little bit from your diary? Yes, this is from my wife's diary that she kept, and she writes, Carl, my name is Thomas C., but the C stands for Carl, so said, Carl and I were just waking up when some terrific sound and thud jolted the house. We lay there a few minutes, but after a couple of these jolts, Carl was out of bed and out on the back steps. When we got out there, we saw planes dive bombing over the harbor. Traces of smoke from shots, which were being fired from the Navy Yard, drifted off into the clouds. Then came a surge of rat-a-tat-tat of machine guns. It all happened so suddenly that we couldn't believe that it was the real thing. After dashing back and forth, in and out of the house to see what was happening where, for a few minutes, Carl finally came to the decision that it was the real thing. Our neighbors were out watching what they thought was a sham battle. One, Dolores, just couldn't believe it because someone had phoned her that the planes were painted to represent Japanese craft on purpose to make it more realistic. She and Sharon, her daughter, just sat in the window watching. All the time shells were bursting and bombs were exploding. For a few minutes at a time there was a slight lull. A friend, Tinky Smith, on the other side of the peninsula phoned and wanted to know about it all. Her husband was in the Navy Yard on duty. Carl dressed and went over to see how Tinky was, but he didn't go until there was a lull from the firing. Just after he left, the firing started up again all around us. It was all so close, the loud cracking, popping, and thumping. We had no time to be frightened. It was too interesting to watch and listen to. Where's,
I'm gonna let you,
okay.
thank you. I just need a
Okay,
little-
oh, well, that's okay.
That's just ice. Do you wanna, I don't want tomorrow to come.
I would rather have the other, but this will be all right.
Right outside the door there.
Cause there's too much, and you might mention that that was picked up. That's the shrapnel that was falling.
Yeah, I will.
If you want to do that.
That you're full. No, let you get your.
Yeah, I've got a tickle in my throat now.
Okay.
This
And
is
the
so-
coughing, we're trying to.
Yeah, we eliminate
Yeah,
the
so
cough.
I guess
eliminate
we
the-
could, all of us stand up and sort of stretch our legs. But you need to.
Well,
relax,
I can do that too. All right.
It's fascinating. So you really didn't,
I'll go
Know
back
what
to
had
the,
happened.
I'll go back to the restroom
Yes,
and be
sir.
right back.
yes, sir.
And this will lock, so I'll watch for you when you come
Oh,
out.
all right, thanks. You're gonna let me, oh, thanks. Got it. Thank you.
There's
Excuse
no
me.
telling. There's absolutely no telling.
No,
We know that.
but, we were.
Maybe you should have been reading this instead of me.
No, no, no,
You're doing real well. Thanks. So much.
Ugh. How about,
Does anybody else want water?
give me that transcribed one to read from instead
Well,
of,
there's, it's just too, you can, there's, too much. That's why it's broken
I'm not
down.
gonna read it all, but
He's not gonna share
I'll
your
just
inner
read
secrets in
this,
your
this
diary.
part of it.
Well, I don't,
Well, wait a
What
minute.
we'll do is, when you're ready, I'll push the button again, count, just, take a deep breath, and then Newell is gonna tell the tape that we took a break, what you were doing, and what we're going back to. So are you going back to read some more in the diary?
Yes, if that's all right.
No, it's
Fine.
wonderful, that's just fine. All right, are you ready, or,
Wait just a minute.
okay?
should we keep this was up, we picked this up around the house.
I'll mention that.
Yeah,
Well, I didn't know what you want to do.
yeah, just leave it right there, and we'll, whatever he does with it, we'll make sure it gets recorded.
Oh, and this
That's-
one that you need.
Let's see. Are you picking up this diary here
I am.
as I was reading from it?
What I have in the picture is from at the top of the book to the top of your head is what is framed in this picture.
Oh, well, then maybe it's better that I read from the
You can
book.
read from whatever you want.
Yeah, I think it'd be better too, Carl, because I'm broken it down, eliminated some of the extra.
Okay.
Well,
Well, then where do I go from here?
Lift it up,
Well, this is the end of it here?
I think so. Just pull it
Oh,
out
all right.
and lift the book up so.
No, this will be all right.
Okay?
Okay.
Lift
ready?
the book up so she can see the book.
No, it's fine right where it
Oh,
is.
all right.
It's fine right where it is.
After a short break, we're going back to our interview with Mr. Carl Moore. He is reading from his wife's diary of the day of the Pearl Harbor attack.
To continue from her diary, she says, while Carl was at Tinky's, Dolores and Esther, the neighbors, came over, and they had just about talked me into believing it was a sham battle. Her husband's ship, Dolores' husband's ship, had gone out this weekend with life photographers on board. Esther thought she had seen the planes coming from Wheeler Field from her kitchen window. Just as Carl came in, the radio announced that Pearl Harbor, Honolulu was being subjected to a bombing attack by an enemy. When Carl came in, he said that shrapnel was cutting off the limbs of trees over at Tinky's. He knew it was a real thing. He had seen the USS Utah roll all the way over. I hastily fixed coffee for Carl while he prepared to go to the yard. By that time, the noise and vibrations were coming fast and furious. I had to pick up Gooba, which was our daughter's nickname, because I just knew she'd be scared to death with the windows rattling and the house shaking. During the worst of it, Carl, Gooba, and I stood under a doorway together. He was so sweet, just his kind, protecting arm helped. All the while, anti-aircraft shells were popping and machine guns roaring. The planes were flying so terribly low, we all went into the kitchen to see the planes as they headed over the house and the trees toward the harbor. As we stood at the window and watched, we saw splashes in the water caused by fragments, apparently. Just as Carl and I left the kitchen, we noticed that a machine gun bullet had passed through the kitchen and the door, and we hadn't even heard it. Later, we found that the bullet had also gone through our daughter's room, passing about 3 inches above her crib, just where she had been standing before we picked her up.
How old was your daughter?
9 months. The daughter was 9 months old. Well, we cleared out of the kitchen promptly. We sat in the living room and just looked at each other. Carl drank his coffee, and when things cleared slightly, he left the house. So,
It's just remarkable, fascinating how wonderful that you kept that diary.
now, are we still on? All right, and I left the house and got into our 1938 Studebaker coupe and drove around the harbor to go to my duty station. And then in driving around the harbor, it was I drove past the ships that were by that time burning, and I was sort of trying to keep my eye on the road, look at the burning ships, and watch to see if a plane was coming in to strafe the car. I was concerned about that. But anyway, I got around the harbor safely and went into the Navy Yard, was waved right on in, and got there just about the time the first phase of the attack ended. This would the attack began at 7:50 in the morning, and the first attack, first waves were finished in about 45 minutes, and about by 9 o'clock. And I'd gotten into the yard, and our unit was trying to get all the guns that we could, and to set up all the anti-aircraft guns, and find some ammunition. And things were in somewhat of a turmoil. Shortly after I got in, the second wave, the second attack wave came in. And everyone was firing most everything they could get their hands on. It was some people were even firing 45 caliber pistols up at airplanes that were 10,000 feet in the air, which was, of course, absurd. We were probably in more, those of us on the edge of the harbor were probably in more danger from our falling shrapnel than we were from the Japanese planes, because they were concentrating on the ships. The next day, around our house, we found fragments of, these are some of our shrapnel from some of our own anti-aircraft weapons that were fired. These fragments had fallen around our house, and maybe some on the house, which my wife picked up the next day. The second wave finished its attack in about 45 minutes, and so by 11 o'clock that morning, the whole thing was all over, except that there was a lot of panic around the harbor, and the burning ships were sinking and still exploding with some of their ammunition as the fire got to them. I knew that I had witnessed a horrible thing. My battalion spent the rest of the day going out hauling in ammunition from a naval ammunition depot, hauling it in to replace the ammunition on the ships that they needed for in case of a further attack. And we helped haul some of the injured people who were badly burned out of the water, and took them over to the Naval Hospital, which was a part of Pearl Harbor. So we spent the day doing that. About sundown, the two of our patrol planes, they were called PBYs, had gone out to search for the Japanese fleet. They came in and flew low over the entrance to the harbor, which was where there was an army fort, Fort Weaver. They flew low over that to land on the water. They had docks there that the seaplanes landed in, operated from. And someone at Fort Weaver panicked and gave the alarm that Japanese glider planes were landing at Fort Weaver. And that created quite a panic.
So that wasn't true?
No, it was just a rumor, of course. But we were ordered to load aboard trucks with our weapons and to go and repel the Japanese, which were presumed to be landing at Fort Weaver. We got loaded aboard the trucks. We were getting ready to leave to drive around to go to Fort Weaver when someone smelled a bad odor, and they gave the alarm gas. Well, we all panicked because everyone had we'd all left our gas mask in the barracks. So everyone got off the trucks and went to the barracks and got their gas mask and got them on, and maybe a half an hour or 45 minutes later we got the trucks reloaded with everyone wearing a gas mask. And by that time someone realized that the odor that we had smelled came from the Pearl Harbor Navy Yard incinerator. And so, and fortunately about that time we were told that they had finally figured out that there were Japanese were not landing, and that we didn't have to go to Fort Weaver to repel the invaders. And it was probably very fortunate that we didn't have to make that trip, because an Army unit over at the Schofield Barracks had been ordered to send a unit also. And the Marines and the Army might have met halfway, and we might have had a battle between ourselves had the order not been canceled. We continued until about 11 o'clock that night. The 6 planes from the carrier Enterprise, fortunately, our 2 carriers that we had out there were not in Pearl Harbor at the time, so they were at sea and they were not attacked. But they had sent out search planes, and 6 of the planes from the Enterprise came back to land on the Enterprise, and the captain of the Enterprise wouldn't let them land because he didn't want to light up his ships for fear of Japanese submarines attacking the ship. So they were ordered to go into Pearl Harbor to land in the island, Ford Island, where the ship's tied up. There was a landing strip there, and some naval aircraft operated from there. They were directed to go there to land, so the ship wouldn't have to be lit up. Well, landing was cleared. They sent in the authorities, the ship authorities were, the Navy Yard Authority authorized them to make the landing at Ford Island. They came in, and someone on a ship, one of the ships, didn't get the word, and they opened fire at these 6 planes. They were, as soon as one person opened fire, all the ships and everything around opened fire on our 6 planes coming in. One of them made it safely, not safely, but he was shot up a little bit, but was able to land at this airstrip on Ford Island. The other 5 were shot down in flames, and several of the pilots were killed. I think one of them parachuted out and made it safely. And one of the planes landed in flames on Pearl City, near where my wife was staying that evening.
She and your daughter.
And my daughter, yeah. And she was staying with 2 of the neighbor ladies there. They were staying together in a house, didn't know what was going to happen. They were then able to call the Pearl City police to come down and help you, and they did. They came down and helped these 3 families to evacuate them up into the hills in case the Japanese would be landing the next day, and they wanted to get them away from Pearl Harbor. So they went up into the hills and had some experiences there, which Bryant has written up into her diary. But 2 days later, after checking with the Red Cross and various other places, I was allowed to leave my duty station in the Navy Yard and to go to where I'd found out my wife and daughter were, up in the hills. And I went up there and met them there, and we and then we were
How
able
did
to.
they get out of Pearl Harbor and safely home to this country?
To this country?
How and when did your wife and child,
oh.
baby, get?
Well, we went back to our home in Pearl City, and I had to go back and report for duty, but she was able to stay in the house. Then things had subsided enough to let them stay there in the house, and we and I was able to get off occasionally and be with them.
Well,
They-
when at what point were they evacuated?
They well, all civilians who were not native-born Hawaiians or who didn't have jobs there were evacuated as soon as they could. They didn't have enough ships or planes flying back to the coast to take everybody out immediately. So she stayed until March the 15th, was it?
Something like that, March or 42.
About in March, and then she was she and the baby were flown back to the West Coast. And shall we cut for a minute?
We're coming back after another break, and I want to ask Mr. Moore how he was awarded the Legion of Merit. I see on his biographical information that he was awarded the Legion of Merit and the Bronze Star.
Well, when my wife was evacuated, I stayed in Hawaii until July, and late July, in which my unit was ordered to go with the 1st Marine Division into Guadalcanal, which was in the Solomon Islands, and the Japanese had started building an airstrip there. And if they had completed it, it would have been a place from which they could have cut off our supplies going to our trade between Australia and New Zealand and the United States. And so we were ordered to take the island and develop an airstrip for the United States. And we did. We went in and without much opposition, but the Japanese reacted violently, and we stayed there on Guadalcanal for 6 months. My unit did, while along with a lot of other troops and finally some Army troops, the Japanese, we developed a perimeter defense around the airfield, which we completed, and the Japanese would land on either side of the perimeter and come in and attacked us, and it was touch and go for 6 months. I didn't think that we were going to make it several times because we were under a lot of fire, bombing every day, and frequent shelling from Japanese ships at night. But we managed to make it through that all right, and well, finally, after a lot of casualties and a lot of fighting there.
That's where the Atlanta went at.
And the USS Atlanta was sunk there one night, offshore. I saw the naval battle from the shore at the distance. I didn't know what was going on. I just saw the flashes and the explosions out in the ocean. My unit did fire. We fired at a lot of Japanese aircraft that were coming in to bomb us, so we fired back at some of the Japanese ships to try to keep them from getting in too close so their shelling would be less effective. And from that, from the work that I did there, I got the Bronze Star with a Combat V. And later on, well, after the end of 6 months, my unit was sent to New Zealand. I'd had an injured knee, not from, I'd fallen going into dugout there that we had, and I had to have a slight operation on my knee. I came back to the United States, stayed for 9 months training other troops to go out and do the same kind of work. I then went back to the Pacific, to the Marshall Islands.
And what was the date of that, about when you went back to the Pacific?
That was in '44. And yeah, let's see, back in 42, 43, yes, in '44, I went back to the Pacific, to the Marshall Islands, then to Guam, and was at Guam with my unit getting ready to load ships for the landing in Japan, on the southern island of Japan, when the war ended. So that was my World War II experience. And you ask about the Legion of Merit. Back in later on, in 1952, I was stationed in Korea, and at that time I was a colonel and a regimental commander, and so I stayed about 9 months in Korea, and for that work that I did there, I got the Legion of Merit. I was awarded the Legion of Merit.
How do you feel about the Korean conflict? We're celebrating the 50th anniversary of it now.
Yeah, it was a very frustrating thing. We had gone back and forth, and finally we sort of stabilized along the 38th parallel and started negotiations with the North Koreans and the Chinese, who were also helping the North Koreans, up at Panmunjom, and finally reached a truce. And so the war is still going on. The war has never ended. We just have a truce that's lasted for 50-odd years, and it was not an all-out war. The United States did not fully support it, and we were prevented from dropping the atomic bomb again because Russia had gotten the capability by that time. It was frustrating to try to hold that one line which was held for over a year while negotiations went on, and we had casualties on both sides during that time. It wasn't quite as frustrating, I guess, as Vietnam later became, but it was the beginning of our doing a police action that we were not permitted to win. We were not given enough troops. We were not allowed to go beyond the Yalu River, and
So you received the Legion of Merit for your service
in Korea. Yes.
And when did you return home?
I returned home at the end of 1952, and then I stayed in the Marine Corps. We had a couple of years in Japan during the occupation. In 1955 to 57, my family went with me to Japan.
By this time you had another child? Or?
Yes, we'd had another child down at the Naval Air Station, Jacksonville, Florida, where I was stationed in the late 40s.
47.
And then I did some other work in the Pacific. I went out with a training unit, took a training group to Taiwan, where we worked with Chiang Kai-shek's forces that he had, after he had evacuated and taken over and was operating from Taiwan. We went out to train his forces and to make a landing and back in China, where he thought that all the Chinese would flock to his colors once he came back to, got back into China. Of course, it never happened, but we went out and trained some of his Marines and worked there. How we doing time-wise?
Got a little longer, got about 10 more minutes.
Got any more questions?
Oh, anything you want to tell us, it's all fascinating. Lived history, whatever fascinates you most about your memories.
Well, I was in the greatest danger during Guadalcanal, during the battle there. And one incident, we were being shelled by a Japanese battleship. And we were waiting to be shelled, they hadn't started. I was in a coconut log dugout, which was my, we didn't really know what was happening out at sea. How many Japanese might have landed on either side of us, but I was in a coconut log dugout, and I'd taken my helmet off and listening to the radio and leaning my head back on a coconut log, and all of a sudden something grabbed my head, and I thought it was the Japanese have landed and they've gotten into our dugout, and this is it. I jumped back, and it was a big coconut crab that had was tangling up into my hair. And those coconut crabs had great big claws. They could even move a coconut around, and so that was
a funny experience.
That was a funny
you
experience.
You must have had a lot of frightening experiences.
Oh, I did have, yes.
What were some of the most frightening?
Well, and I guess before we had built this dugout for our command post, we had dug a little trench. We couldn't dig very deeply because water seeped up in it. We'd hit water, and I was lying in there with our first sergeant. He and I were lying there while the Japanese were shelling, and one of the fragments, we were alongside each other, one of the fragments hit his leg and knocked the calf of his leg off, injured him very badly, and so I had to get help and put on a tourniquet and things like that. I had some other bad experiences in Korea when some of our patrols would come back bringing bodies that the legs had been blown off by a mine that they might have stepped on. Things like that were not very pleasant.
I know that you were here at the History Center on the 6th of June for that meeting. Makes me think, do you keep up with people that you were with?
Yes, to some degree. We have a Retired Officers Association here in Atlanta that meets once a month, and we see people from all the services there. We have a Pearl Harbor Survivors Association that meets once a month, and we've attended that occasionally.
Erected a monument at Marietta.
Yeah, we have a monument out at Marietta for the Pearl, in the Marietta National Cemetery there.
So you do have some buddies that you...
Yes, we do, and we have friends that we've made at these meetings. And
when did you retire?
I retired in 1964 after 28 years in the Marine Corps.
And a very remarkable career, remarkable experience.
Well, thank you.
And you came to Atlanta then?
I came to, in 1964, knew that I was going to retire. I'd been going to taking some courses at George Washington University to qualify to teach school, and so I got my master's degree in education from George Washington University. I had to stay 1 year, and so in '65, after I finished my graduate work, I came back to Atlanta and began teaching in the Atlanta school system. I was teaching mathematics at Northside High School. And from '65 until early '70, and teaching became less and less rewarding in those days, and I became a high school dropout and went to, got a job at Emory University doing administrative work, and I worked out there for 11 years. And
So you did some double dipping
yes,
at Emory.
well, yeah.
Teaching and then Emory.
Huh?
Emory after teaching.
Oh, yes, Emory after teaching, right. Yes.
And now you're content to enjoy Atlanta, I hope.
Well, yes, we enjoy Atlanta.
Well, we're
Very
so
much.
grateful to you for
Well-
this interview, which is
Well, thank you.
most grateful.
I hope you can smooth it up enough to make it acceptable.
Doesn't